Okay. Okay, you ready to go again? It's been a wonderful 2 days, hasn't it? Wonderful, terrific speakers. And we got another day of more terrific speakers today. Okay, our first one this morning is going to be Don Schorn. And we have published 3 of his books, and we're going to have another one that's going to be coming out. He was here last year with the first book that he did. Now, Don is a retired engineer. So it seems like a lot of the people I get have switched careers from one thing to another, and now they're writers and lecturers. But Don has done a lot of research into the beginning of life on Earth. You know, if you're familiar with Zecharia Sitchin's work, where he translated the Sumerian tablets, Don has gone even further than that. He's done a tremendous amount of research into the beginning of life on Earth and the possibility of extraterrestrials being involved in the creation of life and also the creation of civilization and the advancement of civilization. He's found records that I didn't know existed, one of a kind. So these are the main things. He has a real talent for research and finding out these things. The first book that we did last year was called The Elder Gods of Antiquity, and he calls it the Elder Gods Theory. Now, it goes along with my work. In my work, I call it the Archaic ones, the ones who started everything. He calls it the Elder Gods. So the first book last year was published was The Elder Gods of Antiquity. And when that came out, we announced later we're going to have a second volume. And people kept emailing us and saying, how can you have a second volume? He told so much in the first one. What's left for the second one? I said, there's a great deal more information in the second one. That came out this year, Legacy of the Elder Gods. So it's a continuing story. And the third volume is Garden of the Elder Gods. So it's continuing. He is keep finding more and more information. Now, the Gardens of the Elder Gods should be out by the end of the year. Then we will have the trilogy. And he has also written a book on reincarnation. This one just came out. But to me, Don's forte is his research and finding facts that people don't really know about and organizing them. There's no channeling or nothing involved. It's just hardcore research. And so this is where his forte is, finding these things out. So that's what he's going to be talking today about is the theories he's come up with the life, how life began on Earth, and how civilization was guided along by powers from outer space. Okay, this is Don Schorn. Okay.
Thanks, Dolores. Okay. Thanks, Dolores. Well, good morning. And thanks again, Dolores. What a great-looking group. I see many familiar faces from last year and extend a warm welcome to everyone in our audience. Thank you all for attending this year's conference. Dolores and her team have outdone themselves with a fabulous conference. Thanks, Dolores.
Don was one of our authors who were worried about getting in here. And he got in, I think it was Friday night, very late. So this is one of the ones we were waiting on.
Okay. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and it's okay. Okay. I think that's the beginning. As the screen states, I'm M. Don Schorn, just Don to all you good folks. I'm here to discuss my Elder Gods theory. That theory forms the basis of my trilogy, as Dolores said, which is collectively known as the Journals of the Ancient Ones. From an extensive investigation of Earth's archaeological, geological, and paleoanthropological records, the Elder Gods theory emerged during a 9-year research and writing project. I claim 9 years, but additions and updates, along with research and revisions, have continued into the present since its onset in August of 1996. Now, almost 13 years later, such work might have taken an ordinary person maybe 6 years to complete, but like I said, I'm still working on it. This research was conducted with an open mind, without a preconceived conclusion anticipated from the study. In fact, between 70 and 75% of the notes ultimately used for the first journal were collected before the theory had first started to emerge. And yes, I had on several occasions considered abandoning this project, but I figured I had too many hours invested to merely walk away. But more importantly, I was also learning things not taught by conventional educators, and thus remained very curious and motivated to continue this research. However, it should be noted that I possess no psychic abilities, no metaphysical skills whatsoever, or have I any personal knowledge of extraterrestrials, nor have I ever seen what I would consider a bona fide UFO. The conclusions for the Elder Gods theory were simply derived from old-fashioned study and research, from a scientific perspective, using logic and deduction. This investigation sought a theory that would unite the many different elements of Earth's known past, all within a common and logical explanation. Due to my natural skepticism, I prefer to thoroughly investigate and analyze a topic before coming to any conclusions. Thus, I refrain from making fantastic claims, or at least try, perhaps due to my mechanical engineering background. As an engineer, I strive to fully understand and then explain how things work, and that might help justify my requiring those additional years that were taken to complete this research. Probably still doesn't help though, does it? The Elder Gods theory was partially detected from a common mythology that existed throughout the ancient world. That included a primordial belief in a golden age when order was created and peaceful times prevailed. I concluded that that golden age existed roughly between 11,500 BC and 10,500 BC. Ancient texts indicate that the very earliest or eldest gods had created that golden age, although their influence on Earth vastly predated that period. Those elder gods were once the greatest powers, but supposedly became evil when younger gods eventually became dominant upon Earth and displaced them. Over time, these younger gods defeated the elder gods, forcing them into exile from Earth until some future time when their return would be allowed. Those elder gods were the much later offspring of the earliest species of intelligent life that had formed shortly after the Big Bang Genesis, which occurred some 13.7 billion years ago. Those first beings emerged perhaps as soon as only 2 billion years or so ago, after the creation of the universe. But that earliest life formation still took place about 7 billion years before Earth and our solar system even formed, which only occurred about 4.7 billion years ago. After undergoing a difficult start, those earliest beings gained great knowledge and enlightenment, and eventually met other like-minded early life forms elsewhere in distant galaxies. Over time, still other early species were also encountered, representing a total of 7 life forms from 7 different homeworlds. Ultimately, those 7 different species formed a coalition that became known as the Cosmic Order to help younger emerging races they might encounter throughout the universe. The intent of that organization was to manage the development of each infant race they might encounter. That was accomplished by educating its populace and controlling what was taught, resulting in measured progress through regulated growth. Any further advancements then depended upon the achieved maturity and morality of each emerging species. Such nurturing and assistance was not merely an altruistic act by a group of advanced enlightened beings, but also an act of self-preservation. By thwarting the innate trait of self-destructive behavior inherent in infant races, their own existence and longevity could also be assured. Over eons of time, this group of enlightened beings became known as the Ancient Ones, and much later were commonly known on Earth as the Elder Gods. The Ancient Ones were altruistic and pragmatic beings, neither benign nor malevolent, whose purpose was to promote strict adherence with their cosmic order. Their cosmic order evolved as a result of their enlightenment and perhaps even at the direction of the Creator. That code of conduct was created to produce and maintain universal harmony. It was also an attempt to break the prior repetitive cycle of chaos and destruction that had once threatened the well-being of the early universe by guiding infant races towards peaceful coexistence and enlightenment. It was the process mentioned in ancient texts that brought harmony and order from chaos. That code, that code allowed knowledge and civilization to be bestowed upon emerging worlds in exchange for a regulated and metered rate of growth that was based on the level of enlightenment and the value system of each infant world. Essentially, this code acted as a safeguard against chaos. This code of conduct required civilizations to envision all possible outcomes from their actions and inventions, knowing that all acts have permanent consequences on everything throughout the cosmos. That code stated that the rights of a species ended when they infringed upon the rights of other life forms and the universal well-being of the cosmos as a whole. The cosmic order was a simple code of conduct consisting of basic laws, rules, and regulations universally applied throughout the cosmos. There will be more about this code discussed later in this presentation. But meanwhile, long ago in a faraway galaxy, kind of sounds like a George Lucas movie, our solar system eventually formed about 4.7 billion years ago, some 9 billion years after the universe had first formed. Much later, after billions of years had transpired, representatives from that cosmic order coalition ultimately contacted our solar system, where human-like life was first developing on a planet beyond Earth. There is simply insufficient data available to determine which planet was their homeworld, but the most likely candidates were either Mars or Maldac. Meldec was the planet that once occupied the 5th orbit from our Sun, which now contains the asteroid belt. That emerging human-like species eventually produced a highly successful culture on their homeworld with assistance from the Cosmic Order Coalition of the Ancient Ones. that species had evidently even explored Earth on their own during the remote past. But a later planetary blunder around 700,000 BC destroyed Maldac and created the rocky remnants that now make up the asteroid belt. The date of that destruction is deduced from a number of geological indications. The first clue is found with the extremely rare meteorites that exhibit a double molten state that are known as tektites, which date to that time frame. The second is the largest known meteorite shower to take place on Earth, which occurred between 700,000 and 650,000 BC. The third is the largest asteroid impact ever to hit Earth, calculated as occurring around 700,000 BC and expected to be buried under the Antarctic ice cover. Further, the time frame for these events was near the end of the Goons glaciation of our last ice age, when its effects were extended by perhaps as much as 10,000 years, prolonging its end to about 690,000 BC, thus making it the longest ice cover duration of our last 4 glacial periods. The destruction of Meldec and its creation of the asteroid belt is the most likely cause of all these anomalous indicators, with only 700,000 BC fulfilling all those time frames. That event acutely altered the future of our solar system and extensively affected Earth and Mars. It also disrupted the advanced civilization of that early planetary outer-like human species. That required the ancient ones to establish bases on Earth's moon as well as on Mars for the few outer planet survivors, since Earth's ice age climate was not conducive for alien life at that time. But those bases and supportive measures only provided temporary relief, since the atmosphere of Mars had also been damaged during Maldec's destruction. Perhaps as early as 500,000 BC, the ancient ones started genetic engineering work to produce a common recombinant species compatible with both Mars and Earth. They brought together DNA from the outer planet human-like descendants with our earthly Pithecanthropus species, better known as Java man and Peking man and Heidelberg man. That produced an unnamed genus the Elder Gods theory refers to as the Protosapiens, better known as Swanscombe man and Steinem man. During that time, Earth continued its own natural evolutionary changes with the emergence of Neanderthal man, a branch barely different from Pithecanthropus man. Genetic alterations continued after the Protosapiens with varying degrees of success, finally resulting in Cro-Magnon man emerging around 43,000 BC, leading to fully modern man about 11,600 BC, with the legendary Golden Age occurring shortly later. But all that progress would ultimately be dealt a setback with the Great Flood of circa 10,500 BC. Earth sounds like they were going through a rough time. That event caused the Pleistocene extinction, in which mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, giant cave bears, and Cro-Magnon man became extinct. Earth took about 1,000 years to purge the effects of the Great Flood, with the earliest cultural reemergence around 9600 BC, with more widespread repopulation efforts occurring between 9300 and 9200 BC. After the Great Flood, the outer planet human-like beings started their own quest to reinvent their space travel capabilities in order to reach Earth for their own colonization. That effort split the outer planet descendants into two groups, one remaining loyal to the Ancient Ones and the other opposing them. The opposition group finally succeeded in reaching Earth for colonization around 5300 BC. Their presence greatly disrupted the intended development planned for Earth by the Ancient Ones. They created chaos by starting a world war and using the cosmic order mandates against the Ancient Ones, eventually forcing them into exile from Earth. With the Ancient Ones' departure from Earth around 3150 BC, the opposition outer planet human-like colonists then established themselves as gods, as known from Earth's ancient mythologies, and lorded over the human population, which essentially became their serfs and servants. But before their departure, the ancient ones had greatly influenced Earth's development, imparting many gifts and legacies to early humans. Those legacies included the introduction of civilization, the education of humans at learning academies, the introduction of food grains and advanced agricultural practices, the construction of communal cities and complexes, along with the introduction of spiritual beliefs that will be discussed later in this presentation. But perhaps the Ancient Ones' first and most important legacy was their fundamental mandate, known universally as the cosmic order. Modern anthropologists have noted a metaphysical spirit as an underlying element within humanity's most ancient beliefs, which included a superior order to which all matter in the universe is subjected. There is ample evidence that Earth was introduced to this cosmic order during remote epochs. It was also called the Great Order or Universal Reality, and was known by numerous names within each separate ancient culture. Archaic tablets from Sumer and Akkad in ancient Mesopotamia stated that the Mies were the divine laws that govern the universe. Ancient Persian mythology stressed that all deeds were to be performed in accordance with a righteous order they called Piri, which designated a way of life that was in harmony with the cosmos. The Hindus knew the cosmic order as Rita, as referenced in the Rig Veda and other Sanskrit texts. The Egyptian concept of this divine law and order was evident in their earliest records and was identified in their coffin texts as Mat. Mat was thought to regulate all the cosmic, political, and social laws within the universe, as well as the righteousness of each individual. An integral part of Hopi religious belief was their sacred Mangako, their law of laws, which was perhaps their understanding or version of the cosmic order mandates. The intent of introducing this universal code was to prepare each world for later cosmic unity as a member within a larger but celestial community. With that common background, which included universal trade practices, familiarity with extraterrestrial beings, common laws, and spiritual thought, along with other similar commodities, the intent of this shared or universal upbringing was to prepare each emerging world for eventual commerce, trade, and diplomatic contact with numerous alien worlds. That universal intervention and its metered growth was further implemented to prevent destructive actions before they could occur. The hope was to spare later infant races the loss and suffering the first beings had wrought upon themselves prior to their own enlightenment. As infant races progressed towards more advanced levels of civilization, ethics and moral values were also introduced, which included spiritual concepts and philosophical thought. On any emerging world, the implementation of the cosmic order always started with the introduction of civilization. But Professor William Howells, one of my favorite historians, claimed that civilization is not an inherent human concept, but rather one that must be taught. That raises the obvious question: who were those first instructors of humankind? It appears that the ancient ones, along with their helpers, were those instructors. Those helpers were selected from prior infant race graduates from those worlds previously instructed by the ancient ones. As civilized lifestyles developed on Earth, the education of simple, useful trade skills was also taught. That included making clothing and footwear, observing astronomical movements, foretelling time, and instructions to relay ideas in picture form, which is evident with the grand artistic cave paintings of the earliest Cro-Magnons. Ceremonial caves were those earliest classrooms. The exquisite artwork found in the European caverns at Lascaux and Dordogne in France, Altamira in Spain, and the Grimaldi caves of Italy taught pre-planning, perspective, and attention to detail. As more sophisticated concepts were introduced, teaching occurred in isolated learning academies. Perhaps the earliest schools are found within the ruins of the megalithic structures that once comprised the ancient academies on the tiny island of Malta in the Mediterranean, such as the Hajarim and Tarzine ruins, as well as on the small adjacent island of Gozo with its Gigantea complex. But these were rare and isolated learning centers, perhaps as old as 30,000 BC. Other much younger academies, dating to times only thousands of years before the Great Flood, are found in South America at Tiahuanaco, mainly at its Pumapunku area, and also similar sites in Egypt that included the Osirian and the Valley Temple. These sites offered instruction in cultural organization and advanced agricultural practices, using grain seeds likely supplied by the ancient ones. This allowed permanent settlements to be formed, replacing the prior nomadic way of life, allowing city complexes to eventually emerge. As revealed in the second journal of the Elder Gods, Legacy of the Elder Gods, the ancient ones were organized into 3 distinct groups to carry out their mission and assignments. Excuse me. These divisions included the missionaries that actually interacted with emerging worlds, introducing civilization and teaching its populace. The second group consisted of the architects, the builders or repairers of damaged planets, and the early megalithic structures used by those missionaries. The third group was the explorers, the monitors of developing planets, who assessed their long-term potential and evolutionary rate. It would have been useless to attempt to bring civilization to Earth when the dinosaurs ruled. Thus, they monitored the planet until its indigenous species was ready for such intervention. The explorers also served as the enforcers, the policing arm of the cosmic order. Ancient texts indicate that wars between the ancient ones and an eighth species of first beings that did not join the cosmic order have continually occurred over time, along with battles fought against other rogue species. In addition to wars, the explorers were sanctioned to destroy emerging species on non-compliant worlds, which were identified as threatening the well-being of other planets or whole solar systems. Apparently, they were the 007 aliens with a license to kill. In such cases, planets were not destroyed, just the offending species, but that probably didn't provide much comfort to those species that were being exterminated. Although specific duties were divided among these three groups, routine work efforts within any one group often overlapped into the other areas of expertise. This meant that missionaries were still able to fend off attack from a rogue intruder that might suddenly interfere with their civilizing efforts on an emerging world without having to call in the explorers to repel that attack. Missionaries were also equipped to rebuild damaged structures after regional natural disasters that occurred on emerging planets without having to call in the architects. Such overlap of assigned duties also account for style and construction differences found in some of Earth's oldest structures, which were built to last for millennia. Additionally, workers comprising each distinct group would change on a cyclic basis, replacing the present group of ancient ones with a different crew. Such crews often comprised a mix of the 7 different species of ancient ones, so no one species would culturally dominate an emerging world with only their single homeworld influence. Besides teaching concepts and theory, these ancient learning academies also introduced advanced devices that we now recognize as anomalous artifacts, such as 2,500-year-old electric batteries, 3,000-year-old descriptions of turbine engines, 4,000-year-old model airplanes, and depictions of huge electric light bulbs displayed in Egyptian temples. As enlightenment of the students grew, more abstract ideas of spiritual thought, philosophy, and the concept of human immortality were introduced. The existence of spiritual contemplation is puzzling, perhaps even contrary to what would be expected. Similar to the emergence of civilization, spirituality is not readily self-evident, or something that a primitive species would stumble across, especially during their daily routine duties of securing food, clothing, and shelter, all while attempting not to become food for other creatures. Primitive lifestyles simply do not inspire self-evaluation or philosophic thought. Hence, just as with the emergence of civilization, religion and spiritual concepts also appear to be imparted commodities. Metaphysical thought that focused on the nature of a higher power, along with the abstract commodity of spiritual thought, is simply not a naturally occurring event. Such concepts appear to have been introduced to human cultures rather than self-conceived. Presumably, the expected primitive reaction would have been an instinctive emergence of superstition and symbolism, along with fears or phobias, commodities known to have existed among primitive human groups that were not influenced by the Ancient Ones. However, after the exile of the Ancient Ones, natural superstitions emerged, resulting in occult practices and corrupt religious doctrines. Once becoming widespread, those corrupt concepts distorted the earlier known truth and wisdom contained in the spiritual doctrine that the Ancient Ones originally imparted. The concept of reincarnation, which was Earth's earliest detectable spiritual belief imparted by the Ancient Ones, was perhaps the biggest loser. Modern anthropologists have noted a distinct metaphysical influence that formed the basis of humanity's most ancient spiritual thought, which reflected a belief in only a limited animation of the physical body. That belief further inferred that some non-physical force was also associated with each entity. That unseen commodity, which some ancient cultures referred to as the inner man, continues to exist after physical death through the human soul and exhibited an unseen realm before a rejuvenation process occurred. That ancient concept is the essence of the modern reincarnation belief. Reincarnation emerged independently throughout the ancient world in various parts, as part of the knowledge known to early humanity as the ancient wisdom. A later corruption of this fundamental concept occurred through a campaign of degradation and distortion by later human clergy, which created numerous imagined afterlife lands of either a paradise or an atrocity, where the deceased entity would then reside. Excuse me. Reincarnation is a philosophy of life that explains the purpose of physical existence and our spiritual immortality. It is the long-term journey of continual discovery and the perfection of each individual entity, a journey that simply cannot be accomplished within only one span of physical life. It forces no penalty for mistakes, only the price of repeating lessons until each teaching event is eventually learned and mastered. Mortal life consists of a series of tests, all allowed to be taken over and over until passing, without ever failing or burning in hell. It promises no utopian lounging in heaven without purpose or duties, but rather continued contribution through assisting others from the master level. Such learning never ceases, with continuing trials and lessons constantly being encountered, providing for further personal correction and growth. Each future improvement adds to our previous base, always building upon past gains within this personal corrective process. The quantity and degree of trials for each present life are set before birth as our learning lessons. Such lessons are based upon our current ability and capacity or our enlightenment level. No lesson ever encountered in life is beyond our present comprehension or capability. There exists all the time in eternity to continually repeat unenlightened and unhappy lives until those retained deficiencies causing such misery are corrected and our behavior is finally modified. Religion is never a passport or a ticket to salvation. Rather, it is merely a compass, is setting an intended course and direction. Reincarnation professes a finite purpose for physical life, along with an ultimate fairness and dispensed justice. While we may escape detection of wrongdoing in our present life, we must eventually atone for such transgressions sometime in future lives. The ancient ones stressed that reincarnation involved personal responsibility. The actual effort for salvation is always left to each individual. No one else is going to save us or gain salvation for us. Each of us sets our own timetable for personal correction and growth. If the Creator had merely wanted to control over us or adulation from its creation, it would have originally confined humanity within a corral or prison as a captive audience from which to derive such homage and control. Why convert humanity if that was the intended goal, when the power for such control would have already existed right from the beginning? Reincarnation was the belief observed by the early Egyptians as well as the Hindus, who associated it with the concept of karma. As you all know, karma is the inevitable outcome of events that emanate from every physical act, forming consequences that then ripple throughout the entire universe, often simplified as a universal reward or punishment process. The ancient ones revealed the continuation of each individual consciousness after physical death with ascension into a different non-corporeal dimension. Within that realm, subsequent physical existences are chosen, which provide further learning opportunities that allows each entity an opportunity to gain enlightenment, perfecting their own character composition in a progressive, step-by-step fashion. Thus, the seemingly vast and overwhelming task of perfection is spread over as many physical lives as might be needed, without the pressure of failure averting that pursuit. When the soul finally sheds all deficiencies and faults after numerous lifetimes, ultimately attaining a state of perfection at the master level, it then reunites with the Creator within the spiritual realm. The reincarnation process allows a soul to choose the time and place of its rebirth during a conjunction when cosmic influences and unfolding events would provide necessary lessons for the evolution of that specific soul. This is not predestination, but merely the inevitable occurrence of events from which we might learn. Our individual response to those events determine the ultimate result or outcome. Hence, our purpose during mortal life is to learn from those lessons, correcting identified faults, and contributing to the world we inhabit, all while gaining enlightenment through acquisition of knowledge and understanding. The original Egyptian reincarnation belief can be traced back to their god Osiris, which was the doctrine taught to humans before the Great Flood. Subsequent teachers such as the gods Thoth and Horus the Younger continued those teachings of Osiris. Those ancient instructors were actually helpers of the ancient ones. However, that reincarnation doctrine did not survive into dynastic times, when a new pantheon of gods emerged around 3150 BC that then ruled over humanity. But that earliest religious concept of the Egyptians continued within the pyramid texts, which professed that some spectral form of existence survived physical death. That record also states that Earth was connected with and governed by the cosmos. The heavens were believed to be the true home of humanity's spiritual component, with heavenly inhabitants exerting a powerful influence upon humanity and Earth, apparently referring to the ancient ones. The Egyptian Book of the Dead acknowledged the dual spiritual elements of the Ka and Ba, the invisible components that comprise each individual human essence. The earliest Egyptians knew that the physical body was mortal and expendable and did not survive into an afterlife. However, they knew that the Ka is immortal. The Ka may best be described as the commodity Western religions refer to as our soul. The soul, or Ka, enters the body at birth and is part of the universal spirit, the same composition as that of the Creator. But the soul, or Ka, is not the total component of an individual's essence or consciousness. It also includes its Ba, another ethereal companion commodity. The Ba always remains within the spiritual realm, separate from the unity with the current physical body and its Ka, while in the material world. The release of the soul after physical death allows the Ka and Ba to once again be reunited in the spiritual realm, completing each consciousness at their currently developed level. Each released Ka brings the most recent life's events, lessons, corrections, failures, and obtained knowledge to the previously accumulated whole of that individual. Think of the Ka as a flash drive memory that is formatted with the core values of an individual, but without specific memories of any past past events that have shaped those values and traits. Call it our conscience or compass, with its purpose to help guide our free will choice, while recording and storing event data throughout the current mortal life. After the death of each physical life, the Ka then joins with its Ba in the spiritual realm. Think of the Ba as the mainframe hard drive for each individual entity, containing all the memories of past lives for that specific individual. After each death, one's flash drive Ka is then downloaded to the Ba mainframe, once again uniting the Ka and Ba. That combined unity or reuniting of the Ka and Ba then reflects the complete conscious awareness of an individual's essence at that point in time, restoring all the memories of past lives lived by that distinct entity. That unified completeness then reflects the individual's present progress towards their perfection. Every subsequent Ka imprints the core values that individual has learned and mastered at their stage of development. This provides the gut feelings, instincts, inner voice, or conscience that entity has so far cultivated, making each person a unique entity. Each individual then utilizes those core values while making their life path choices, all without any divine intervention. Otherwise, we would not have free will choice. Those core instincts are derived from formative events encountered during past lives, and may also contain a glimpse of those major lessons that produced those values. Hence, there appears to be a limited amount of information from past lives that can be brought into the present incarnation, but those glimpses are mostly vague impressions or limited memories of major events. Perhaps it is of lesser significance who we were previously, since the past cannot be changed. Rather, the importance lies with what we can become in the future, predicated and based upon what we do presently. Perhaps another misconception is that God judges us during this time on the other side. Rather, we evaluate, not judge, our own past actions, since only we know the true intent of our deeds. After that review and assessment by each entity while on the other side, a specific life path is then chosen for the next incarnation. That life is based on the current needs of each individual for their further learning, correction, growth, and contribution to the world. This involves events that will occur throughout the new life as learning opportunities, but each individual's free will choice ultimately determines how they react to those lessons, perhaps even ignoring them altogether. Do not attempt to complicate life by fighting against it. Experience life. Find truth within the simplicity revealed by the ancient ones. That message was one of learning, correction, contribution, and growth and enlightenment. However, such a journey cannot be completed in one life, but do not despair. Take comfort that no one fails this assignment. An eternity of time is always available for everyone to complete this task. The only failure is not recognizing and taking advantage of life's lessons when they occur, and therefore having to repeat unpleasant life path trials again until learning their lessons, never failing them. As previously stated, ancient Egyptian beliefs stated that only the soul ascended into heaven, knowing the mortal body could not survive physical death. This seems to contradict the well-known Egyptian mummification process, but it doesn't. As times changed, so did the influence over the Egyptian culture and its religious practices. Only later did culture start to believe that it was absolutely necessary to preserve the physical body as best possible, such as the mummification practice practiced by the dynastic Egyptians. There was a clear disconnection from the much earlier pre-dynastic times, which had been influenced by the ancient ones, and those of the later dynastic periods ruled by the outer planet human-like gods. Those changes are immediately apparent right from the start of the pharaonic dynasties, starting around 3150 BC. That date also represents the start of the Ancient Ones' period of exile from Earth. That allowed the outer planet gods to impose new beliefs on humanity, designed to inspire both reverence and fear of those seemingly powerful and superior beings. Anthropologists generally attribute the introduction of deliberate mummification to the Egyptians starting as early as 4000 BC. However, that practice did not become widespread in Egypt until after 3150 BC, again after the exile of the Ancient Ones. Most prior mummified bodies occurred from natural environmental conditions that had preserved the remains, even those that had been deliberately buried by the deceased community. Ritual in-ground burial was practiced by the Cro-Magnons long before the Great Flood, but without any trace of mummification. Early human interment only buried bodies between 2 and 3 feet deep, allowing the hot sand to desiccate the corpse, thus preserving the skin and hair. Some Egyptologists believe mummification was a form of insurance policy, which provided the deceased family a double assurance of the soul's entrance into heaven. Over the years, that practice changed in Egypt, hitting its peak by 1000 BC, mainly as a status symbol for the wealthy and privileged few. Yet, Yet another misconception was the Ancient Ones' status as gods, elder or otherwise. Previously, they had always been categorized as divine beings, referring to their position as emissaries directed by the Creator to carry out the divine plan. The term divine, meaning of the Creator, signified the highest level of physical life within the universe, sent by the Creator to fulfill a master plan. Later, the term God was used to denote all beings above humans, but below the level of the Creator. That term also encompassed the human-like helpers of the Ancient Ones, such as Osiris and Thoth, who were distant cousins of the outer planet human-like gods that had eventually colonized Earth. Once the outer planet colonists engineered the temporary exile of the Ancient Ones from Earth, they elevated themselves to the level of gods above all humans on our planet. Further degradation of the term God ensued over the years, with those beings also becoming known as the Anunnaki, Igigi, Nephilim, Genie, angels, and various other and numerous ancient divine divinities. The personification of physical gods first emerged around 3350 BC with Enki, who led the first outer planet human-like colonists that had arrived on Earth. Due to a lack of differentiation between the Creator and those later physical beings that displayed superhuman-like abilities, they became known as gods to uninformed humans. That started the transference of divinity from the ethereal to the physical realm, although the Creator would never have a reason to confine its essence within a physical vessel, which would limit. The ancient ones themselves revealed that the Supreme was the Creator, an entity they did not refer to as God, but only as the Creator. The term God simply appears to be a much later classification devised by humans or some other physical beings, with its actual meaning augmented or altered numerous times over the ages. Its later evolution appears to be humankind's attempt to explain and elevate certain physical beings to a higher level of adoration and power. But gods were a somewhat numerous commodity during archaic times, with a separate god acting as the protectorate over each ancient city-state. Those gods were then assigned a certain status or level within a divine hierarchy, a level that often changed periodically. Yet the earliest concept of a pantheon of gods was first reported in the Egyptian pyramid text. That so-called gods list is known as the lineage of Horus, which reveals a group of 9 gods called the Ennead. And that included the likes of Osiris and Isis, Set and Nephthys, Horus the Elder, so forth. While this list actually refers to early human-like helpers of the Ancient Ones, it also reveals a 10th god, Atum. According to the pyramid text, Atum is the very old one, the oldest one, the Lord of all, the Great One, and the Primeval One. Records state that Atum was born before heaven, earth, the gods, humans, or before anything else came into existence. Atum means the one who has been completed by absorbing others. Atum was reportedly the concept known to the first living beings, the divine ones, apparently referring to the Ancient Ones, from which the genealogy of the gods emerged. However, such a definition implies that those divine ancestors were not gods themselves, but their later lineage or descendants apparently became known as gods. That definition clearly defines the ancient ones along with the outer planet human-like gods. Then why are we not taught this history and allowed to know our archaic past? Seems to be a pretty good question. The simple answer is that much of our true record of Earth's early cultures and our planet's benefactors has been suppressed over the ages. Evidence that might prove the existence of the ancient ones and their fateful conflict with the outer planetary human-like gods simply appears to have been lost over the ages. That outcome is the result of an organized campaign by the outer planet human-like gods to eradicate every trace of the ancient ones from Earth's record. That effort involved the distortion, suppression, editing, and redacting of archaic accounts, along with the wholesale destruction of ancient texts and records over the years. That revised account of Earth's historic events started with the earliest written records, dating back to circa 3500 BC with the Sumerian culture. However, most of those records were merely financial dealings or administrative documents, not narratives or historic accounts. It is known that between 90 and 95% of the Sumerian clay tablets consisted of commercial records and business transactions only. Not until around 2200 BC did myths, legends, and historic narratives, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, first emerge. Hence, very few texts even existed prior to the exile of the ancient ones around 3150 BC. Therefore, only a limited number of records existed that would have accurately described the ancient ones and their human-like helpers or their mission on Earth. Generally, emerging worlds would have recorded very little information about the ancient ones, since their direct involvement with newly contacted infant races occurred during the earliest formative phase of each world's cultural development. Most likely, those infant races had yet to self-evolve to a level of producing some form of writing, and hence an accurate or detailed account of those events simply did not exist. Further, descriptive abilities would have been quite limited or simplistic during those earliest formative periods, most likely resulting in merely pictorial representations, symbolic notations, and art scenes such as prehistoric cave and rock drawings. While such depictions do suggest encounters with unusual beings, they provide little insight or additional specific details of their intended meaning. The eradication plan devised by the outer planetary human-like beings first demonized the ancient ones as fallen gods, demons, or evil entities. This was necessary during those centuries shortly after the temporary exile, since most of the humans knew about the ancient ones. Their existence simply could not be denied. The Rig Veda is a popular ancient record that reveals such distortion of archaic history. It reveals that in the beginning, the grand Asuras of heaven, meaning the ancient ones, were the only living power. The Asuras were initially described as the oldest and wisest ancestors, the elder brothers of the Aryan gods, who we know now as the outer planet human-like gods. But the elder brothers, the elder gods, possessed the greatest power and magic of all the gods, according to the ancient literature. Only later were those elder gods demonized as dark divinities and transformed into enemy demons, the evil gods of ancient times mentioned in archaic records. The second phase of the eradication plan involved the deliberate suppression by the outer planetary gods of nearly all accounts and records of the ancient ones. Evidence of this second phase can be detected by 2000 BC. With nearly total suppression of the existence of the ancient ones, the only accounts allowed to be known were a few negative ones. Although very little direct reference and evidence is known of the ancient ones, Earth's oldest records, myths, and oral traditions and legends provide the best informational sources. That effort to revise history also spread to various religious sects and spiritual beliefs, where their doctrines and records were distorted. As human memory of the ancient ones dissipated over the ensuing centuries, the next phase, the third phase of the eradication plan, focused on the usurpation of all past accomplishments made by the ancient ones. Those deeds and accomplishments were then claimed by the outer planetary human-like gods as their own. Rather than completely purging the ancient ones from oral traditions and written records, an act that would have also removed their legacies or gifts bestowed upon Earth, some texts were simply rewritten. That became the subsequent method enacted for this third phase of the eradication plan by the later descendants of the outer planetary human-like gods. Such wholesale rewriting of the ancient records omitted, redacted, and distorted any remaining mention that alluded to the ancient ones. Later additions made to the Egyptian Book of the Dead clearly reflected this new phase of writing, which commenced shortly after 1600 BC with the advent of the 18th Pharaonic dynasty. By 1500 BC, this method was widespread throughout numerous cultures that were under the influence of the outer planetary human-like gods, producing their distorted version of Earth's archaic history. But not all text required editing. Certain cultures reflected only the influence of the outer planetary human-like gods from the start. Those texts also tend to be the most consistent, without the usual contradictions found in other ancient texts. Perhaps the least confusing texts are those from Sumer and Akkad. That is the result of those cultures essentially being controlled by the outer planet human-like gods since their inception, as was the case with Akkad, or from the very early periods of development as experienced in Sumer. Only minimal evidence of the ancient ones can now be found, scattered throughout our archaic written records, with nearly all knowledge and accounts of the ancient ones totally lost. Merely a few remaining vague references and fragments now exist from which to partially extract only a sketchy picture of those very advanced divine beings. Excuse me. Thus, the ancient ones can only be identified from their many epithets or titles and the lasting legacies they left. But along with their faded memory, humanity's concept of the human soul and the understanding of the reincarnation process also became corrupted. But we can rediscover those core values taught by the ancient ones so long ago by focusing on the teachings they had imparted. Their intended message concentrated on simple core values that can assist us in getting back to the basics. Excuse me. By simplifying our life and adhering to their fundamental principles of learning, correcting, contributing, and gaining enlightenment and understanding. Such an approach can overcome the false concoctions spread by our presently distorted secular influences, those of greed, control, entitlement, and deceit. These distortions and untruths are promoted by our present entitlement mentality, in which we wait for someone else to help us. Rather, always look within for all that is needed throughout life. No task ever encountered is beyond our present capacity and ability if we always perform at our current best level of enlightenment. Perhaps we can still become an active member of the greater celestial community as originally intended. Remain cautious throughout life, but also seek and encourage the best in people while always striving for happiness. Now, before opening the presentation to the question segment, I would like to thank Joy Newman for her work in formatting the PowerPoint slides. Thank you so much, Joy. It was a super job. At this time, I do welcome your questions and comments, but also feel free to contact me after this presentation with any questions that are unable to be addressed due to time constraints now. And I always welcome your inquiry, and answers are always free, which some may describe as being their true worth. So no guarantees.
I have two questions.
Certainly.
Because the information was so suppressed and distorted, obviously your research was very difficult. So what were your sources?
Again, mainly ancient texts, primarily Sanskrit and Egyptian records. Sanskrit probably, the Sanskrit records were probably the most helpful of all. Sumerian texts, as I indicated in the presentation, really fall right into Zecharia Sitchin's work, as a matter of fact. My interpretation, if you will, of Mr. Sitchin's work, everything that he talks about in his Earth Chronicle series really refers to what I refer to as the outer planet human-like gods. Has absolutely nothing to do with the ancient ones. If you'll realize there really are no alien appearing beings in the Earth Chronicle series. So it really doesn't account for rock drawings, things that we know in ancient texts that do describe such alien, very, very alien beings. Like I say, some of the Egyptian and most of the Sanskrit records were the most helpful.
You also stated that no lesson is beyond our present ability or capability.
Absolutely. We may encounter an event during our present incarnation that puts us right at that precipice, right at the edge of the cliff, but we chose that, we accepted that trial, that lesson, prior to our incarnation.
Then I question why the high rate of suicide.
I think it's, I hate to say laziness, despair, merely giving up. Some people just will not put forth the effort. And we see that more and more in today's society, where we have this entitlement mentality that I'll just sit around and let things happen for me, rather than me going out and doing what I need to move ahead or survive. And I cannot explain suicide. I'm not sure that anyone truly can explain suicide, but to me it's just a complete.
I wasn't here when we had suicide. He wasn't here that day.
I just wanted his take on it.
Yeah.
But it is a very sad commentary. I do address it briefly in my Reincarnation book, and my interpretation from what I have picked up from ancient texts and my intuition indicates that actual suicide ends up actually moving us back. Instead of remaining at the same level as our prior incarnation and not gaining anything at all, and perhaps only moving ahead a little bit, it's not merely going back to that level of our previous incarnation due to suicide, but also a set back a little further. In other words, maybe we have to relearn some of the things that we supposedly had already mastered or had pretty much in control because of the failure in the present incarnation causing that suicide. So in my opinion, it is truly a setback. It is probably the worst thing that a person could do. It delays, it merely delays time. If you want to relive, a person committing suicide is going to have to face the issue that caused the suicide in the first place in some future life. Bring it on now and face it, head on and overcome it. Confront it and overcome it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, good
I
morning.
had a question about the asteroid belt. When you
Yes.
mentioned that it used to be a planet named Malta, how did you discern that it was a planet, that it was the name of it, and can you give us an idea of what size it was in relation to Mars, Venus, or the Earth?
Yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. Meldec supposedly, well, let me explain why it was a planet. Astrophysicists, some astrophysicists, love to keep things in their conventional thought pattern. And they conclude that the asteroid belt was strictly debris material during the creation, the formation of our current solar system, or our solar system. We haven't had one before. And it did not congeal, it did not condense, and hence all of the material that was supposedly there for a planet merely didn't form. I don't subscribe to that, and most true astrophysicists, which I'm not one, also do not. We have meteorites, asteroids, chunks, bits and pieces of the asteroid belt that have impacted Earth. We have been able to analyze the rocky material to know its composition as an example, and to also know that it had been part of a much larger formation. So it is not unformed material that formed later, that never formed. So that's why we know it was a planet. The amount of debris left in the asteroid belt is really insufficient, because much of the planet was vaporized with its destruction. Another major portion was sent outward, towards the sun, and that impacted the moon, the Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and eventually the sun. So a lot of it was lost, in a debris field, if you will, throughout our solar system, and the remaining rock left within the asteroid belt roughly is about half the volume of the original planet. That planet was approximately the size of Earth, or perhaps even a little larger. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
I have heard, and it was just like rumored, that when the American soldiers went into Iraq, and the museums were very badly pilfered, that there was too much of a systematic knowledge of what certain individuals were after and ransacked and took away. Have you heard? I was wondering if there weren't ancient texts there. Have you heard any contents that was taken that was about suppressed knowledge?
That's an excellent question. I've heard conflicting reports. It appears now that I'll kind of hit this, do a hit and miss here. It now appears that the Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein had removed all of the valuable, all of the truly intrinsic ancient artifacts before the actual invasion. It was not pilfered. And Saddam's, Bob, Baghdad Bob, the reporter that was on with, there's no invasion going on when the tanks were showing in the background while he was being, filmed. They spread the false news that their rare artifacts had been looted and pilfered by the invading, American troops and so forth. That was not the case. I know of no private record that wasn't well known already. That Iraq had. Their treasures had long been pilfered long before the Iraq War. And was there any other part of your
No,
question?
and I have a second question.
Oh, certainly.
In David Icke's 5th book, The Truth Shall Set You Free, he has different pyramidal structures, all of which, I was hunting out who's the they that stops the suppression of knowledge, and he calls it fourth dimensional water consciousness that are off-planet dudes. Is this the same as your off-planet dudes? That's Ellen's expression, but fourth dimensional water consciousness.
I'm very, very familiar with David Icke. I do not follow his theories and his
I hope
his ideas.
I hope you've read volumes 1 through 5, and don't begin with 6.
Okay.
With the biggest secret, I think. But have you read volume 5?
I can safely say that I was safe. I have not read any of them.
Thank you.
I'll be honest with you. I won't.
I would say that in volume 5, the controllers of Earth, he maps out very clearly and calls them off-planet. Fourth dimensional water consciousness, quite like yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, good morning.
Good morning. The information on Akkad or Arcade, was that mainly by the extraterrestrials, like the temples of Akkad?
I'm sorry. I missed the first part of
the information? I was wondering, which was it, the extraterrestrials that were dominantly in Akkad?
It was the outer planet human-like gods, the much later descendants from from the Meldec disaster, since we don't know if they were from Mars or Meldec. But,
Okay.
It was.
But they were the outer beings?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not the ancient ones.
Because I was given a statement, I was taken to the temples of Akkad from Sumeria, and
Okay.
I always have been trying to find out what was Akkad, who was Akkad, and so forth. And so
Okay.
you mentioned that.
Yes, as the so-called civilization started in Mesopotamia, it really goes back to 4900 BC as an example, and it all started in a city in an area called Eridu, and that was purely 100% under the influence of the ancient ones, along with their human-like helpers, the good outer planet beings, not gods.
Right.
And it was slowly infiltrated by humans under the tutelage and control of the outer planetary human-like gods from their original empire in the Dilmun Empire, which is really the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. And the Sumerians first started to infiltrate the Eridu area, which was known as the Ubaid culture under the ancient ones. And the Ubaid culture welcomed the Sumerian migrants into Eridu and allowed them all the privileges and so forth. That's the way things are done under the ancient ones formula. And unfortunately, the Sumerians infiltrated, colonized, migrated, whatever one wants to call it, with the sole purpose of taking over that original early settlement of Eridu. That's what actually became Sumeria. And just as the marshland there continued to dry out, Eridu was right on the edge of the marshlands. It was reclaimed from pure marsh, and it was bordered on the water. As the evaporation continued, as the ground dried out, the land receded, and hence there were new settlements built south of Eridu, which happened. The first and major ended up being Akkad. Okay. And there was a war then around 2300, 2340 BC between Akkad and Sumer. And basically, read Sumerian text, they won. You read Akkadian text, they won. So let's say it was a draw. In either case, they merged and they became the Sumer-Akkad Empire. That empire, many years later, became Babylon. Okay. We have a very misty idea of, it's all the same area under the different names, under the different influences of,
Because the small statement was that you were taken by messenger from Sumeria to the temples of Akkad. So that gave me the impression that I was a refugee being saved and taken into a safe place.
Very interesting. Yeah. It is. And by the way, the good people of Ubaid ended up migrating basically to Egypt. Yeah. So that's
Thank you very much.
Very good insight. Thank you so much.
All right, this will be our last question here, the last one.
Okay. Well, I got several. Is that all right?
The last one.
I'll talk quickly, or I'll try.
Well, I'm another mechanical engineer, so maybe we're all in the
Thank
same.
you.
I have a hobby of just exactly what you're talking about. You mentioned one time that there was a base on the moon.
Yes.
I've read that the time we landed on the moon, that if you drop something on the moon very heavy, that it seemed to vibrate, kind of like being on a tank, as though maybe the moon may not be even natural, it may be an artificial structure of some kind. And that probably is still bases on there. Do you have any? What's your comment on that?
Well, there have been numerous theories put forth that the moon was, excuse me, a hollow object, basically a spaceship that brought people, excuse me, from another world. The metallic ringing has been alluded to by some pretty reputable scientists. It has not been explained very well. Don Wilson wrote a book, Our Hollow Moon, several books, as a matter of fact, about the hollow moon. And his research is pretty strong. It's pretty convincing. My opinion is out on it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I do believe that the moon is a natural satellite of ours that formed when our solar system formed. It was not knocked out of place somewhere else within our solar system and captured by Earth later. The way we see our solar system now, including the asteroid belt, is how it formed, with the asteroid belt being the fifth planet rather than Jupiter being the fifth planet.
Okay. I've read a lot about Atlantis, and it seemed like they had the last part of it deceased about 10,500. Was that about what you thought?
That's Plato's account, I think, gives it 9453 or something like that from memory. I have a different take on Atlantis, and everyone misinterprets what I say. I believe Atlantis existed, but it existed in numerous different places over many, many millennia. As I referred to in the presentation on the learning academies, I mentioned Jarim and Tarzine on Malta. That was Atlantis at that time. Perhaps it was 30,000 BC. Atlantis, it was a generic name, like school, college, Atlantis. And Atlantis existed on Malta in 30,000 BC because of catastrophes there or changes in climate or whatever. It was moved to other places, over the millennia. So it's where, if you look at it, everyone that has found Atlantis in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, the Azores, the Bahamas, they're all right. They're all correct. Because at one time, Atlantis, the Learning Academy of Atlantis was there. If that's in Santeria, Bimini, Azores, wherever, they're all correct because it's strictly a generic name for the Learning Academy.
Okay.
My approach, anyway, my belief.
The world is controlled by a cabal of families, the Bilderbergers, the Rockefellers, and others. And I've read somewhere that there are some of these wild aliens that are actually controlling this cabal. Like what you mentioned, being aliens that they really don't want us to advance to this fifth dimension. They'd rather keep us as slaves to do their dirty work for them. Have you got any comments one way or the other about that?
It's an interesting proposition. I've yet to be asked what happened to the outer planet human-like gods on Earth. They eventually just slowly dissipated, disappeared into human society. That's basically they were very limited in number to start with, and they intermarried, if you will, with humans, and their bloodline diluted down the road and so forth. But they ended up being dissipated throughout the human population. It is not impossible that they became the super rich, the Bilderbergers, the Medici, etc. over that still exist today, operating behind the scenes, so to speak.
We have to stop because Greg says that's the end of the tape, too.
Okay.
We've run out of time. Okay.